Wine Stories, a podcast to discover the world of wine by Etienne Pommier.
Hello to you all, and welcome for this new episode of Wine Stories. In today's podcast, I have chosen to talk to you about England and its leading role in history, shaping the world of wine as we know it today. While it is established that the British have always been wine lovers, their influence has never been limited to being just a key market buying the production of other countries, more favoured by geography and nature to make wine. England has truly contributed to develop and build entire vineyards and regions, bringing great wealth to cities like Bordeaux or Porto, and even invent new styles of wines, as in Champagne. From William the Conqueror and Eleanor of Aquitaine to the Great Fire of London in 1666 and the birth of Champagne, join me for a journey exploring the intricate love story between England and wine. And who knows, maybe by the end of this episode, I will have managed to convince you to try an English wine. It all starts with a wedding on July the 25th, 1137, in Bordeaux St. Andrew's Cathedral. Louis, heir to the crown of France, is only 13 years old when he marries Eleanor, Duchess of Aquitaine, 3 years older than him. Only a few days after the ceremony, the old King Louis VI dies and his son takes his place on the throne as Louis VII. An energetic and adventurous young lady who likes arts, music and hunting, Eleanor soon gets bored with this austere young monarch who lives like a monk, and after a few years, she obtains the annulment of the wedding on March the 18th, 1152. The thing is, she has grown very fond of a dashing young prince, Henry Plantagenet, Count of Anjou, whom she marries 2 months later on May the 18th, 1152. The legend says that the wine of Isson, nowadays a third classified growth in Margaux, is served at the wedding. In 1154, her husband ascends to the throne, becoming Henry II of England, and, after having been Queen of France, she becomes Queen of England at 33 years of age. With this wedding, the Kingdom of England, already present on the continent from Normandy to Anjou and Touraine, extends its possessions all the way to the Spanish border and to Auvergne. Anjou wines are the first to benefit from Henry's rise to power, and the fame of the great white wines of the Loire starts spreading. But it is Bordeaux that will benefit the most from this alliance. At the twilight of her life, Eleanor of Aquitaine retires in the Abbey of Fontevraud near Saumur, where she dies at age 82. If you visit the abbey today, you can still see a recumbent effigy alongside that of her husband, Henry II, and that of their most famous son, Richard the Lionheart. Under the English rule, trade develops with Guyenne, a region that includes Bordeaux, but also what is then referred to as the High Country, the vineyards located upstream on the river, such as Bergerac on the Dordogne, Cahors on the Lot, or Gaillac in the Tarn. The English market soon becomes a major prospect for all these wines. But the Bordelais, with their maritime climate and rudimentary winemaking technique at the time, can only make clarets, pale and light red wines only about 8 or 9% ABV. And they see as unfair competition those black wines from the high country coming from regions with much more sun and warmth. So in 1241, they obtain the privilege of selling their wines first, and eventually they will cut the competition's access to Bordeaux and its harbour, which will lead to the decline of the high country. This set of protectionist rules, known as the Police des Vins, will make the wealth of Bordeaux and bring maritime trade between Aquitaine and England to a level unseen before. In 1308-1309, 102,000 barrels are shipped to England, and this flourishing trade will only stop with the English defeat in the final episode of the 100 Years' War, the Battle of Castillon. Most wine lovers know about Château Talbot, the celebrated fourth classified growth in Saint-Julien that belongs to the Bignon family today and makes some of the most elegant reds in all the Médoc. But this name of Talbot, Gallicized over the years, actually comes from John Talbot, 1st Earl of Shrewsbury and Waterford, Constable of France, who camped in Saint-Julien with his army in July 1453. In October of the past year, Talbot had taken back Bordeaux from the French after the city had pleaded allegiance to the French king in 1451 to avoid retribution. But the decision of Charles VII to abolish Bordeaux privileges and tax franchises are promptly resented by the population and cause Gascony's uprising. In response, the French king sends an army 10,000 men strong, and on July 17, 1453, under a scorching sun, Talbot is defeated in the village of Castillon and dies in battle. From now on, the close ties developed over 300 years of English presence in Aquitaine will be stretched, but never cut, and it is another key event in English history that will eventually give birth to Bordeaux wine as we know it today, the Great Fire of London. London, Sunday the 2nd of September, 1666. It is past midnight in the narrow, insalubrious and overpopulated streets of the city when a fire starts in Thomas Fariner's bakery on Pudding Lane. The neighbors sound the alarm and local authorities decide to destroy all adjacent houses to prevent the fire from spreading. But the owners argue against it and call upon Mayor Thomas Bloodworth. After lengthy discussions and lack of leadership, the mayor eventually agrees to the destruction of the houses. But it is too late. The flames have spread to the entire neighborhood and turned into a massive firestorm, sustaining its own wind system that will consume the entire city. For 3 days, London burns to ashes, including St. Paul's Cathedral, and even Whitehall Palace is at risk. It is only on Wednesday the 5th of September that the fire breaks will finally stop the conflagration, leaving a city in ruins. But London will soon be reborn from its ashes, and a new city rebuilt with new shops and taverns, including one that will soon become the rendezvous point of the high society, Pontac's Head. It is Arnaud de Pontac, first president of the Parliament of Bordeaux, who has sent his son and one of his cooks to open this new address in the heart of the newly rebuilt city, about where is located Upchurch Lane today. The Bordelais has an idea. In order to sell the new style of wine he's now making, he wants to have his own tavern in the heart of London to promote it. His family estate is a small vineyard not far from the city of Bordeaux and known since 1521 under the name of Aubryon. His ancestor, Jean de Pontac, bought it in 1533 and started building a chateau on the grounds in 1549. A century later, while clarets are struggling to face the competition of other liquors in the English market, Arnaud de Pontac develops new winemaking techniques to produce a new style of wine, a deep ruby red wine, richer and more profound than any Bordeaux claret, that will quickly become successful in spite of its higher price. In 1660, the cellar book, officially known as the Office of the Pantry, the Butler, and the Cellar of the Lord King, mentions the reception of 169 bottles, 1 parcel of Aubryon for himself, personally delivering for the Lord King and hospitality at 21 shillings per bottle with full jugs. At the Pontac's Head, the cook proposes a true gourmet experience with brand new dishes, and the only wine served is Aubryon, to the delight of famous guests such as philosopher John Locke or writers Jonathan Swift and Samuel Pepys. Soon inspired by the success of this new vin de garde, stylistically much closer to what Bordeaux wine is today, the other chateaus follow in Pontac's footsteps, using the same vinification, maturing and aging methods to produce their wines. This new style becomes very popular, and Bordeaux wines regain a prominent place in the city's market. In fact, it is around the same time that the world's first wine cellar and retail shop is founded, Berry Bros & Rudd on St. James Street, still in business nowadays. The English shippers will even reshape the city of Bordeaux itself, since, as they weren't allowed as foreigners to have their warehouses in the city, they are the ones who will reclaim the swampy banks of the Garonne River just north of Bordeaux to build what we know today as the Quai des Chartrons. In the second part of Shakespeare's Henry IV, published in 1600, Falstaff muses extensively on sherry, a Spanish wine which name comes from the town called Ceret by the Romans, Cherish by the Moors, and finally Jerez by the Spaniards after the conquest of the city in 1264. Vine was originally planted here by the Phoenicians 900 years before Christ, and after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Muslim authorities will allow viticulture to go on in spite of religious law for export trading only. The Moors bring with them the art of distillation, which allows Jerez vintners to fortify their wines, making them more stable and resistant for transportation. At the end of the Reconquista, sherry trade with Europe will flourish, and the wines become especially popular in England, hence Shakespeare's reference. However, the English Reformation initiated by Henry VIII will make all English shippers established in Andalusia heretics in the eye of the Spanish Inquisition. They will be hunted down, and all of them will flee or become privateers. But even so, sherry trade will remain very active, and when Francis Drake raids Cadiz in 1587, he plunders 2,900 sherry butts. Jerez vineyards will keep growing in the 17th century, until the War of the Spanish Succession breaks out in 1701, hitting sherry merchants very hard. The English will slowly move away from sherry, and thanks to a commercial treaty with Portugal, they will develop the trade of another fortified wine from the Iberian Peninsula, port. Have you ever visited the city of Oporto? Nestled on the banks of the Douro River, the historical center is a lovely and colorful maze of tiled roofs, blue, yellow and red houses, with white wooden windows, narrow balconies, and facades decorated with azulejos. And in the middle of the city stands a large Roman-inspired building made of pure grey granite, the British Factory, or Feitoria Inglesa in Portuguese. Built in the 18th century, this chamber of commerce of sorts symbolized the monopoly of British negociants over the port trade. Cockburn, Croft, Dow, Osborne, or Taylor and Ware. Since the 14th century and the start of the 100 Years' War, the English government has realized the need to diversify its supply sources for wine and have turned to Portugal. In 1386, England signs with Portugal the Treaty of Windsor, a diplomatic and commercial alliance enduring to this day that holds the record as the longest-lasting diplomatic treaty in history. The bold and powerful Douro wines soon become popular in London, and British merchants start buying more and more of these at the expense of French wines. In 1678, a Liverpool shipper discovers in the outskirts of Oporto a rich, sweet wine with warming alcohol that has been fortified with aguardente. He buys the whole lot of this new style, and this is the first record of port wine as we know it today. In 1703, English ambassador John Methuen negotiates a treaty with Portuguese authorities promoting the sale of English textiles in Portugal and the sale of Portuguese wines in England with a limited tax. The Methuen Treaty is well known by all economic students, for it served as a base to David Ricardo's classic theory of comparative advantages reformulated by John Mills in 1844. The Methuen Treaty will boost massively the sales of Portuguese wines that represent nearly 2/3 of all England wine imports in 1717, when French wines only account for about 4%. But the asymmetrical nature of the relationship between English shippers and Portuguese growers in the industry will force the Prime Minister Don Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, Marquis of Pombal, to regulate port production and trade in 1756, making the Douro Valley one of the world's first wine appellations. British merchants have helped shape and develop the wine regions of Jerez and Oporto into what they are today. And I could have also talked about Madeira or Marsala in Sicily. But there is another wine region that has a very strong and very special relation with England: Champagne. At the turn of the 18th century, England is one of the major wine markets in the world, with a thirst for fine wines, and one of the regions that's highly regarded in the British Isles is Champagne. Back in those days, Champagne is a still wine, red or white, mainly coming from the chalky terroirs of the Montagne de Reims and the Marne Valley. The wines are primarily sold in barrels, but the first glass bottles have already appeared, and some wines are being bottled, especially to be presented on aristocratic tables. But when it comes to bottling, the champenois and merchants who buy their wines have a problem. After a few months, some bottles explode in the cellars of Épernay or in shippers' warehouses. The mechanism of the alcoholic fermentation isn't yet fully understood, and both vignerons and merchants reflect on how to avoid this. And there's one man who will take a closer look at this phenomenon, an English physician named Christopher Meret. In the beginning, Meret is primarily interested in glassmaking, but soon he starts considering the contents of the bottle as well, and ends up studying the fermentation process. In 1998, writer Tom Stevenson published for the first time the text of the presentation given by Meret at the Royal Society on December 17, 1662. Having seen bottlers in the UK add sugar to the wine to make it brisk and sparkling on purpose because some customers like it, Meret postulates that this addition of sugar, what will soon be called liqueur de tirage, triggers a second fermentation in the bottle, trapping the gas inside, thus making the wine sparkling. This is the first description of the traditional method 6 years before Dom Pérignon arrives at the Auvillos Abbey. This understanding of the second fermentation and how to induce it to make a sparkling wine is concomitant with a technological progress in glassmaking, with the use of charcoal by Sir Robert Mansell. The use of charcoal allows to reach much higher temperatures compared to wood ovens, which in turn allows to produce much thicker glass. These heavier, thicker bottles are now resistant enough to withstand the pressure inside the bottle. And since many customers seem to like this new style of wine with bubbles, champagne producers will embrace it, taking advantage of the new English glass. In 1728, Louis XV allows the transportation of champagne wine in bottles, opening the door to export sales for champagne houses. And the following year, entrepreneur Nicolas Ruinart, who has grown aware of the appetite for this new product, opens the first champagne house dedicated to the production of sparkling wines. But the English influence goes even further, for the British market also led to the birth of a new style of champagne. At the end of the 18th century, sparkling wine from Champagne has become famous, and it is now sought after all over Europe. Madame de Pompadour, mistress of Louis XV and champagne lover, used to say that it is the only wine that leaves women beautiful after drinking. And legend has it that the first champagne cup was molded using the shape of her breast. In this era, the preferred taste is sweet, and if champagne is sparkling, it is also quite rich in sugar, for producers now add a touch of sugar before releasing via a process called dosage. But in 1848, an English merchant named Burns asks Perrier-Jouët to send him the 1846 vintage without any dosage, to obtain a drier wine that he believes will be popular. Unfortunately, it fails. The wine doesn't sell, and he's eventually forced to return the bottles and replace them with a sweeter wine. But 10 years later, when the drier and more evolved 1857 vintage comes on the market, the public likes this new, drier style so much that merchants keep asking for more. 20 years later, most champagne houses now produce a drier style of sparkling wine along the lines of brut champagne as we know it today. For centuries, England, then Great Britain, then the United Kingdom, has played a key role in the world of wine as a major market for other countries' production. But in recent years, the UK has also started producing wine again, and it is now becoming a force to be reckoned with, especially in the sparkling wine category. As often in Europe, it is the Romans who introduced vines in Great Britain, taking advantage of a milder climate in the first centuries after Jesus Christ. In 1086, a great survey of the resources and productions of England is ordered by William the Conqueror, and this manuscript, called the Domesday Book, mentions 45 vineyards in the southeast of England. Over time, climate changes and the development of trade routes with France, then Spain and Portugal will limit the development of English vineyards that cannot compete in quality with the productions of much sunnier and warmer countries. In 1860, the English government decides to further promote free trade by cutting by 83% the import duty on foreign wines, which will give a nearly fatal blow to English vineyards and wineries. But over the last 20 years, things have changed, and new vines are being planted mainly in southeast England. Attempts had already taken place in the 70s and in the 80s, but most of them failed. Being sparkling wine lovers, English winemakers are trying to take advantage of their fresh maritime climate to produce grapes ripe enough to make good sparkling wines. And they have one key advantage: their terroir. Sussex and Kent are known for their beautiful white chalk cliffs overlooking the Channel. Well, that chalk is pretty much the same as the one found on the Champagne slopes. The sedimentary soils of the North Downs and the South Downs are quite similar to the ones in Champagne, apart from the Greensand Ridge, which is also suitable for viticulture. And since climate change tends to warm up the temperatures in England, these regions, historically too cold for vine growing, now manage to achieve ripeness more frequently than not. Over the last 20 years, many wineries have been set up in Kent and Sussex, dedicated to the production of premium, traditional method sparkling wines made with Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier or Pinot Noir. If you haven't tried yet an English sparkling wine, you may be surprised and a little skeptical to hear a Frenchman talk about English bubbles. But trust me, I was, back in Hong Kong, one of the first importers of Nine Timber, a premium producer, and I promise you that you'd be surprised with the quality of these wines, some of which can really compete with champagne. With their sharp acidity, they display a great tension, and in good vintages, if there isn't too much dosage, the wines can be truly fine and lively with aromas of citrus and green fruits, as well as a mouth-watering acid and chalky backbone. As in Champagne, the premium cuvées are aged on lees for several years, and I invite you to try the likes of Hattingley, Gusbourne, Ridgeview, or Coates and Sealy to experience for yourself the quality of modern English wines. From France to Portugal, including parts of Spain and Italy, England has contributed to shape the world of wine over the last 1,000 years, putting entire wine regions on the map and giving birth to new styles of wines. And now, the UK is becoming a producer too, especially with its sparkling wines. Nowadays, the British market is still a major platform for wines from all over the world, even if Brexit challenges this position. In Europe, it is in London that you will find the most active and diverse wine market, with hundreds of merchants, retailers, and wine bars where you can sip a Greek Asiatico before ordering an Austrian Blaufränkisch or a South African Syrah. And in fact, this fascinating diversity will start testing today all of the candidates coming to London to pass the most demanding examination in the wine world. It is a diploma that was also created by the British, and someday I will talk to you more in details about it. So good luck to all my fellow students who, as I release this podcast, are sitting down to pass the Master of Wine.